And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to look at the idea of comparative advantage, and we're going to contrast that with this idea right here of absolute advantage. So when we talk about absolute advantage simply means the ability to produce more of a good than some other person, or if we're talking about countries, the ability of a country to produce more of a good than another country. And then there's the idea of what we economists call comparative advantage, and that is the lowest opportunity cost producer. That means you could produce the good at a lower cost than another person or another country. And then finally, we're going to argue that we're going to have a rule that's going to say that we as individuals, or more specifically countries, are going to specialize in the production of a good for which we have a comparative advantage. And then we're going to trade for other goods. So, okay, what does all this mean? To understand all of this, we need to do some examples. So I don't want to spend a lot of time just on definitions. I want to spend time doing an example of law of comparative advantage. So you can see there's a lot going on here on this chart, and we're going to work through it very slowly, step by step. So we're going to start by saying that there are two people, person A and person B. And currently, person A and person B are not trading. They're in a state of what economists call autarky. They are not trading with each other. And I'm giving you this data. In one day, in a half a day, person A can produce 6 sweaters, and in another half of a day, they can produce 2 chairs. And person B, in a half a day, can produce 2 sweaters, and in the second half of the day, they can produce 2 chairs. So what will society have if society is made up of just these two guys, person A and person B? They're the only two people in our little society. What's the total number of sweaters that they can make in a day? Well, and that's assuming, okay, A is going to spend half a day making sweaters, and he's going to spend half a day making chairs. B is going to spend half his day making 2 sweaters and the other half of his day making 2 chairs. So at the end of the day, how many sweaters have been made? Well, the first half of the day, person A made 6 sweaters, B made 2 sweaters. So at the end of the day, total output, we have 8 sweaters have been produced. And then in the second half of the day, person A makes 2 chairs and person B makes 2 chairs. And so at the end of the day, we would have 4 chairs. Okay, so that's what they can do. Now, notice this. First of all, who has an absolute advantage in producing sweaters? Well, remember what absolute advantage means. Let's go back to the previous definition. Absolute advantage is the ability to produce more than the other person. So who can produce in half a day? Who can make more sweaters? Well, that would be person A. He can make 6 sweaters in a half a day, and person B can only make 2 sweaters. So we would say that A has the absolute advantage of making sweaters. And then what about the absolute advantage of making chairs? Well, A can make 2 chairs in half a day. B can make 2 chairs in half a day. So we would say nobody has the absolute advantage. They have equal ability to make chairs. They have equal ability to make chairs. Now, what about, I said, what really matters to economists is not so much the idea of absolute advantage. What we really care about is the idea of comparative advantage. So who has the comparative advantage in making sweaters and making chairs? That's the real economics question. So on this podcast, we just figured out who has the absolute advantage and what's the total amount of chairs and sweaters that A and B can make in a day if they don't trade with each other. So on the next podcast, what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's get beyond the idea of absolute advantage, and we're going to talk about comparative advantage. Who has the comparative advantage? So we know a little bit about absolute advantage, who can make more. On the next podcast, we'll talk about comparative advantage. Thanks for joining me for this podcast, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast. It's been Mr. Hagan. Talk to you soon.